Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we delve deeply into subjects avoided by the mainstream media and where we challenge the generally accepted wisdom on topics that have a huge impact on our well-being. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and on the show today we're going to discuss electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, and their harmful effects, their effects on our well-being, the effects particularly that are not discussed in the mainstream. With me to do this, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Corey Hillis in California of EMF Sol is his website, EMF Solutions, the company, and he's as passionate as I am about spreading this important message about the potential harmful effects. Corey, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you. Well, glad to be here.
Great stuff. Corey, could you maybe just by way of introduction, just give us and the listeners just a little bit of introduction about yourself and how you got into doing what you're doing?
Sure. About 15 years ago, I had some pretty big health problems. And every doctor known to man couldn't tell me what was wrong with me. So I went to, the Western medicine way, and then I kind of started the Eastern medicine way. And so I kind of dove into that, got better through some special chiropractic work and some other healing modalities that were very holistic minded. And so I eventually became a practitioner myself, a holistic practitioner. And I realized the EMFs were such a big health issue that I started making products and studying. I have a small engineering background, so I started studying and making products for myself and my clients. And honestly, I had so many testimonials and so many referrals overnight, just like compounding on themselves. I had to shut my practice down in a very short time, and I kind of accidentally had a company up here, so it was kind of unexpected and super cool.
Wow, that's fantastic. Great news. Well, just to set this all in some context, of course, the subject of EMFs, the effects of mobile phone use, of Wi-Fi, and of all of these devices in our modern life is something that is very rarely discussed in the mainstream news, in the media, and it's also a topic that a lot of people really don't want to hear about because we all really enjoy our smartphones. We all use our computers and Wi-Fi and all this sort of stuff. And it's incredibly beneficial for modern life. But it does turn out that there are some effects that we really need to know about. We really must be conscious of the full impact, so we can make an informed decision and maybe either limit our use or perhaps address the problem with some of the solutions that Corey, you will share with us in a moment. So that's the general backdrop, is that this is really an unpopular topic that nobody really wants to hear about. But I'm putting it forward out there, saying that everybody, we must really, take a good look at these impacts. So that's what the purpose of the show is today. How long has it been known that these effects are known, these harmful effects? Because we've got the thermal effects, which are the ones that I've heard about, and probably others have heard about in the mainstream media. The alleged thermal effects. So you put your phone to your head, and it allegedly warms up an area of your skull, and this is known as the thermal effect. And allegedly, or I've come to learn that there's effects that are far more serious than that, which are the non-thermal effects, and these effects have been documented. Some therapeutic effects, I believe, for actually increasing bone regrowth after injury. Can you give us a broad overview of the general effects before we sort of dive in, to dissect the harm of it all?
Well, EMFs just 5 years ago, so there's more than 10,000 studies proving that EMFs are harming people. Okay, it's kind of more proven than smoking cigarettes being bad for you. It's more obvious than anything. But obviously, we all like our technology, and so all this is being swept under the rug as long as possible. Just much like the smoking industry, that happened there. The amount of harm is going to shock people when they start diving into the actual studies. One study comes to mind by Franz Adelkoffer. He's out of Germany. He did a study that says, and I use the cell phone too, I'm guilty, but I also believe that we've remediated it and fixed the problem. But Franz Ottelkofer out of Germany did a study that showed that 24 hours on a cell phone, on a phone call, where the levels of EMFs are very high, is the equivalent of about 1,600 chest X-rays worth of DNA damage. Okay?
Wow.
He's an expert in discovering DNA damage. He knows how to do the different assays of how you see strand breaks in DNA and things like that. That study is, if that was broadcasted on regular news, a lot of people would start thinking otherwise. If you told people that this was an X-ray machine, that they'd be getting X-rayed every time they use the phone, I don't think as many people would willy-nilly be making phone calls and staying on their phone all day, you know? So it's not X-rays, it's a lower frequency radiation, but the amount of damage that it is causing people, this silent damage, and this isn't speaking from me, from the scientists themselves, is way greater than most people think. I tell people that genetically modified foods, there's a toxin and a physical stress on your body, eating a bunch of pesticides, and there's a bunch of other physical stresses that can happen to our bodies. The radiation that's increased in us, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, has gone to a level that I think has outweighed all of the other stresses combined. As a matter of fact, when we fix a house, we have over half of the time somebody gets a testimonial. Because when you take that giant physical stress away, people often notice a difference. Now, you talked about the effects of EMFs. Every human being is getting, according to the studies, DNA damage, free radical damage in the cellular level, nitric oxide problems in the cellular level. That's happening, okay?
Yeah.
You can't avoid it because every time we've tested it and the scientists have tested it, they're showing that this is happening in rats and humans and whatever. Now, you said symptom-wise, the popular symptoms that come out of this cellular damage is fatigue problems, chronic fatigue, sleep issues, immune system disorders, and then, of course, it goes to Alzheimer and cancer studies and tumor studies and low melatonin production when you're sleeping, and there's a lot of things. But I guess I named the big symptoms. But although if you don't have those symptoms, that DNA damage and free radical damage is happening anyway.
Absolutely. So you spoke of about 10,000 studies. How far back in time do these studies go? Because obviously this saturation of electromagnetic fields that we're in, you know, even with schools having Wi-Fi for the children, you know, if you walk out in any town centre or in any city, you are absolutely surrounded by people walking around on mobile phones, on Wi-Fi, on all of this sort of stuff. So how long back do these studies go, you know, to looking into these problems of EMF?
I'd have to look at the exact year, but it's pretty darn close to 1970, where the Russians and United States did a study on a bunch of poor Russians using microwave, which is basically radar, microwave, basically same thing. And microwaves, just so you know, happens in a microwave oven. Microwaves is the radiation coming off of cell phones, Wi-Fi. If you guys have smart meters, it comes off of that Wi-Fi coming off of your electric meter, Bluetooth. Like most of the modern technologies today are microwaves, okay? So in 1970, there was a study done to see what higher effects of microwaves might do on a bunch of Russians, and a bunch of them got cancer and tumors and had serious health issues. So this is not a new phenomenon. I mean, we've known about this. Now, that's an unofficial, unpublished study. Most of the studies, though, since then have been on cause and effect and around electricity, because we didn't have cell phones in 1970, so nobody was really too worried about it. The amount of radiation from cell phones, which is around 1 billion waves per second, or 1 gigahertz, has increased, according to a Swedish scientist, about a quintillion in the last decade. So most of your studies, yeah, I didn't know what that number meant, by the way. We don't have a deficit that big. One day we will know that number, but so a quintillion is 1,000,000 trillions. I mean, it's a number that sounds made up. All these studies are screaming, holy cow, there's a big problem, and yet you don't see a lot of it, like you said, in the mainstream media. It's just amazing. But most of the studies on the, I think, bigger problem of the higher frequencies coming out of phones and Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are really just in the last 5 or 10 years. Of
Okay.
those 10,000, bulk of it in the last 10 years, very few studies are on electricity anymore, which is a low frequency of about 60 waves per second. That's what electricity, I think in Europe, is 50 waves per second. But the microwaves from cell phones to Wi-Fi is between 1 billion about waves per second and 5 billion. And the new Wi-Fi coming out goes up to 90 billion. And by the way, you go to trillions of waves per second, and that's an X-ray. So they're all photons traveling light speed. It's a matter of how many times a second they oscillate that changes one radiation to a different kind of radiation. So I'm trying to remember what your question was. I'm kind of covering a lot of.
Yeah. The length of time that we've known about this. I mean, I've heard of a story that that way back, sort of post Second World War, that British radar operators, used to sort of jokingly they'd stand in front of the transmitters so that they could go out on a Saturday night and not have to wear a condom because it affected their fertility. I mean, I don't know whether that one's true, but no smoke without fire. So it seems that there has been knowledge that this is a potential problem, obviously for quite some time. You mentioned way back as far as 1970. So what about the distinction between the thermal effects and the non-thermal effects, because I gather all of the safety studies are solely concerned with the thermal effects, aren't they? The idea that cells heat up through this microwave sort of irritation of the cells. Can you speak to us a little bit about that?
Well, in the United States, our Congress is lobbied over $100 billion a year to keep the safety standards super high. So you're allowed to have a very high standard. Here, the FDA bases the information on an organization that did conclusions in 1994. Their conclusions in 1994 were based on studies in the 80s before any of this was like in public. Sure. So our information is based on thermal studies from the 1980s. That's how the United States determines what they assume is safe and not safe. The scientists disagree so many times over with the levels that the FDA has said is okay. Now, thermal effects is when you said it heats things up, and people have to realize that heating things up is actually a horrible effect. It's not heating like you go out in the sun or you're standing next to a radiator to warm yourself. It's heating because it's the EMFs. The problem with EMFs isn't the EMF itself when it's a lower frequency. It's the vibration that it causes. It's the subatomic vibrating. In a microwave oven, it's vibrating your food so fast and violently because the walls keep those photons inside, so they keep bashing into stuff and vibrating your food, that it's smashing into each other. That causes friction and that heats it. Now, if that's happening in your head, you don't want your brain cells and molecules to be smashing into themselves, which crushes them molecularly, just destroys things, to cause the heat. That's a very different kind of heat than sitting next to something that's hot, that's just radiating actual heat. Sure. So the thermal effects are actually horrible. But the non-thermal effects, I can get into a study it's just 5 years ago that we actually found out how a low frequency EMF causes damage in a cellular level on a non-thermal effect. And that was a guy named Dr. Martin Paul up in Washington State University just 5 years ago. His discovery has catapulted what we're doing amazingly, because now we know, if you don't know how the EMF is harming you, it's hard to avoid in modern society. You don't know how to fix it.
Sure.
And so a lot of people have had these ideas about what might have caused the problem and how to fix it. So now that we know Dr. Martin Paul's studies on how the non-thermal effects actually damage us, we've gotten a big head start. So if you want to know more about Dr. Martin Paul, any of the listeners, I can explain now, but get on and Google Dr. Martin Paul, that's P-A-L-L, and probably the word EMF, and you'll see a slew of videos up on like YouTube or something, and you can learn all about the science going on.
Absolutely. It was Martin Paul, I think, that he speaks of the voltage-gated calcium channels, doesn't he? And this non-thermal effect where cells are effectively flooded with too much calcium because
Exactly.
these channels are opened up. And obviously, normally calcium coming into a cell is a normal thing, and that's not harmful in itself. But I gather it's the over it's the huge influx of calcium at far higher levels than the cell can tolerate, which my understanding is fairly scant. But that seems to trigger a cascade of negative effects, doesn't it? Basically resulting in free radical damage, as you alluded to earlier, within the cell. Do you want to explain a little bit more about that? So these voltage-gated calcium channels and.
Sure, I'd love to. So he discovered that when exposed to electromagnetic frequencies, we have one reaction in the body that we've ever found out about. And this seems to lead to all the other symptoms, because when this reaction is taken care of, all the symptoms seem to go away on people. So we're pretty sure this is it. So I'm going to explain a little deeper into what we're finding out. I think we're trying to find, he found like the basic missing link, and I think we're getting even further in to bridge the gap and then know exactly the process. So a man-made electromagnetic frequency is very different than most of Mother Nature's electromagnetic frequencies. When the waves come by, they come by at a very chaotic, random fashion. So it's called unpolarized. I'm sorry, it's called polarizing when it's man-made, and it's called unpolarized when it's like the sunshine or something. So these polarizing EMFs are vibrating everything, to put in layman's terms, they're shaking everything subatomically. So you can call this subatomic chaos. This is vibrating, okay? This vibration, like a tuning fork, is hitting the right tune to open up a gate on your cell that's supposed to be closed. This gate lets in calcium. There's a gate that lets in sodium. There's a gate that lets in magnesium. And there's a gate that lets in positive ion calcium. This gate is supposed to only open when you need calcium. So just like you said, normally it opens up when you need it. When you don't need more, it closes. The cell doesn't, let everything in, just like vitamin C and everything else. Well, all of a sudden this gate opens because you're exposed to the EMFs and this vibrating. Hit the right tuning fork, the gate opens. Now you have an influx of calcium, and that's what leads to the nitric oxide problems, free radical problems, DNA damage, and the rest of it. So the EMF itself doesn't directly harm you at all. The physicists were right. That's why there used to be a debate on this, because the cause and effect studies for years showed, gosh, this is causing problems. It's causing DNA damage and whatnot. But the physicists were saying it's impossible at a low frequency, at that amount of radiation, can't directly damage DNA, and they were partially right. It can't directly damage it, so it's an indirect process where those dominoes fall and then you get your effects. So if we can stop our reaction to the EMF, which is that voltage-gated calcium channel opening on our cells when it shouldn't be, then we can, in effect, be exposed to radiation on the lower frequencies and not react to it, not have any effects. And that's what we believe, we're onto.
Okay, so the influx of calcium, the overload of calcium, we could say, into the cell, I believe that triggers a cascade of things, doesn't it? I think nitric oxide is released. There's some great information on your website, by the way. I just want to point out to the listeners on emfsol.com. But as you said earlier, Googling with Martin Pol is a great idea. But I think there's a huge increase in nitric oxide, and also is it something called perioxynitrite, and is it these two free radicals that then are firing off and causing DNA damage, single and double helix breakages of the DNA, and so forth? Is that about the sum of it, do you think, Corey?
Yeah, and I'm going to let Dr. Martin Pol get into the really specifics of it.
Yeah, okay.
He does a phenomenal job. He stands up and gives lectures on the subject all over the place. But I will add that one key effect that happens is your red blood cells, which we've shown under many studies we've done and other people have shown, your red blood cells get sticky. So because they're getting damaged, they get sticky and they start sticking together. You see it under a microscope. And when they get sticky, only one red blood cell fits through a capillary at a time, right? And what's the main job of a red blood cell? To deliver oxygen to your body. So all of a sudden, the tissue oxygen in your body is going down. One of the reasons why concentration and memory problems can happen from EMF exposure and using cell phones and the rest is because the cells aren't fitting through the capillaries in your brain. So your brain is literally getting less oxygen over time. And this lack of oxygen causes more toxins to come around, a worse pH. It causes less minerals and vitamins to get in. So the whole environment in the cells and in the body starts to be acidic. It basically becomes more anaerobic in a way that benefits viruses, bacteria, mold, fungus, parasites, and cancer cells.
Wow.
So scientists like Dr. Martin Pall and Barry Trower and a whole bunch of other greats are saying that this process is largely responsible for possibility of maybe Lyme's disease going so crazy in modern society, autism getting out there, and causing all these issues, and many other serious diseases that kind of popped up out of nowhere.
Sure. So just so the listeners could be clear then, let's have a look at all the devices that cause this before we move on to looking at some of the solutions. So
Sure.
we've got mobile phones, and we've got Wi-Fi, we've got baby monitors, we've got smart meters, we've got Bluetooth. Do you have to be careful of electric toothbrushes and razors? Is that sort of EMF, is that going to cause harm as well?
Minor. Normal electrical appliances cause a minor amount of EMFs, unless you have solar panels, which create a ton of dirty electricity, which actually make a home much, much less healthy, according to the science.
Yeah.
Most electrical appliances aren't that bad, especially if you remediate your house with our product. You don't have to touch those. It's the things that have antennas. So you have a modem coming into your house that brings internet. That's not causing many issues at all. But there's a router that it goes to, and sometimes they're the same unit. The router is the one sending the signals out so that you can pick up, the audio or video from a phone or a tablet or whatever. That's the stuff that we're worried about. So if you have audio or video traveling in the air instead of through a line, through a cord, you're going to have EMFs and you're going to have the problems.
Okay, so you mentioned dirty electricity in there. I was going to going on to ask, what about the actual sort of wiring loom around the house? In areas where we might sleep or spend a lot of time, by a sofa or something like that. Is there much danger from literally the wires sort of buzzing at 50 hertz or 240 hertz or whatever it is, depending on what country you're in? And can you perhaps explain a little bit about dirty electricity as well, like what it is?
Well, electricity is an issue. A lot of people, before we had cell phones a couple decades ago and all this other problem we've just recently added to the world, they would go camping and they still wake up from camping and they feel so grounded and like a good night's sleep, and they just have more energy, and they wake up earlier than normal and they have more energy, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what it is. That's because you've gotten away from all the electricity in your home. People still feel that. A lot more people feel that way now because the higher frequency stuff is just a bigger problem than the normal electricity. But yes, electricity does create a field that does cause a little bit of that voltage gated calcium channel problem as well, and the other problems. Of course, if you're under high voltage power lines and you're around big electronic equipment, like sitting up against a refrigerator, you're going to get more of that problem. Okay. But it generally, the electricity around you is a lot generally smaller than your Wi-Fi router, even though the router's maybe on the other side of the house. The router tends to be a bigger problem than the general electrical lines behind your walls.
Okay, so for people's understanding, it would be important to sort of stack up the priorities, which is the worst of the bogeymen, if you like. What about dirty electricity? What exactly is that?
Can I add one more thing? This is something that people don't realize and that's almost never talked about. We found that an actual household fan causes major chaos that's similar to what electromagnetic frequencies do. So to make electricity, you can take a magnet back and forth and you've just made electricity. It's not rocket science. Now, a fan is a magnet that's spinning. So the photons actually, it's called circular polarization. There's a lot of factors that go into chaos and what makes it work. A fan is not as bad as a router, but it's harder to fix because the photons actually travel in a swirly Q fashion. So when they crash into other molecules, not to get too sciencey, there's a lot more chaos going in all directions. So when you're trying to realign that and calm it down, it's actually a little harder to do. But the reason I bring it up is if you want to sleep well and rest well, it's the key. Rest well when you're sleeping. Get the fan out of your bedroom or as far from your bed as possible, and use a product to fix it. Like in my room, we actually have a fan double fixed with two of our we call it appliance harmonizer products, and it's still at least 5 feet away from the bed. And then it's pretty harmless. But most people wouldn't think a fan, and that includes a air purifier, air conditioner unit, and a refrigerator, which luckily most people don't have in their bedroom. Yeah. But those are actually kind of a big deal. So moving on to your next question, dirty electricity. That's the electricity that was supposed to be 50 waves per second, or 50 hertz, or 60 if you're in the United States. That because of not great wiring in your house or some other reasons, then the waves get broken up into usually between what it's supposed to be 60 or 50 and up to like 100,000 waves per second. It just means there's more chaos happening to that electricity, and that is a little more, the higher the frequency, theoretically, the worse the chaos and the worse our reaction is and the worse the problem it is.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. So,
yeah.
So what can we do about this then? Can you tell us a little bit about what you do? Because I gather you go around sort of getting into someone's home and measuring stuff. Can you tell us exactly, walk us through how you'd remediate a home, how you'd check it all out?
Sure. Let me do one more point. So anybody out there saying there's 10,000 studies, gosh, how am I going to find out all these things? I have a great website that's a world organization. It's all scientists. They're not funded by anybody with agenda. There's no bias. They don't sell anything. It's called the bioinitiative.org. Okay, the bioinitiative.org. O-R-G. That's a world organization with environmental leaders and scientists. They have over 3,000 conclusive studies on one website. So if you go there, I think you click report and conclusions, and you'll get a summary of 1,800 studies. So anybody who's just like doesn't want to spend a whole lot of time researching this stuff like we do, that's one place that just you'll get a lot of information really quick.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll put
so
that in the show notes as well.
So you just asked me about what we do and solutions. The first thing we do is we go into a home and we have 3 different meters. One that measures around the electricity range, about 50 to 60 hertz and a little more. And then another one that measures the dirty electricity, which is coined as between 4,000 and about 100,000 waves per second, or hertz. And then we do the microwave range, which is a third meter that measures about 50 million to billions of waves per second, which is where I believe usually, unless you have solar or some other challenges, or under super high voltage power lines, that's where most of the problems are going to come from the microwave meter. But I will say that when we test a house, it's only a partial look, because again, it's not the EMF itself, which is what the meter's measuring, how much radiation. It's the amount of chaos and the subatomic shaking and vibrating that the EMFs have caused. That's the real problem. In other words, you could have a problem on one side of the house, like a router, that's measuring many thousands of microwatts per meter squared on the meter. Sitting close to that's worse than going far. You go on the other side of the house and it barely shows at all on the meter. Does that mean you're totally fine? Actually, no, because the solid material of your house, the walls and the floors, are conducting that vibration through the house. So on the other side, you're still getting some of that vibrating and still getting some of that reaction. So I just want to caution that people don't rely solely on a meter. Back to the polarization aspect, when you have a incandescent light bulb, that's the old school kind where it heats up to create the light. That is the only man-made EMF that I know that's coming off balance in all 360 degrees. So when those photons are flying by you, they're pulling you that way, that way, that way, and that way evenly. So the net force is 0. So it's not doing the subatomic shaking. But a CFL, like a fluorescent light bulb, has a charge going back and forth. So that is vibrating things. So that, again, the meter might measure both of them the same, but the incandescent is pretty harmless.
Sure.
Whereas the CFL is going to be not at all. So
while we're talking light bulbs, what about LED light bulbs? Would you put them in the same basket as the tube fluorescents?
They're a little better, but they're not like an incandescent. But literally, incandescent's the only thing that I have found or thought of that could be a man-made EMF that's literally like nature's, like just doesn't need to be addressed at all.
It's rather unfortunate.
LED,
Sorry to interrupt you there, Corey. Yeah, it's rather unfortunate that over here in the UK, I don't know about in other countries or in the States, but they're getting harder and harder to find incandescent light bulbs, and there's all sorts of information about the the spectrum of light, the lack of blue light and all that, or the blue light's in there but not as much, and obviously they're a far healthier option, the old tungsten filament bulb, and of course they're being phased out. It's rather tragic, but anyway, that's something of a tangent. Coming back to your house walk around, you want to caution people against measuring something on a meter and just thinking that maybe if it's less over here it's okay. Is that what you're saying? Just pick up your thread.
Yeah, correct. So basically, if I measure Wi-Fi that's super high, which every Wi-Fi router today is super high, maxes out our meter. As a matter of fact, the meters have not kept up with the technology. So the technology and a cell phone and a Wi-Fi router has gone so fast, I literally can't buy a meter that measures it. So the scientists at the Bio Initiative, they say that when you're on a phone call, when you're exposed to microwave radiation, that you shouldn't go over 30 microwatts per meter squared, or a kid shouldn't go over 10. And if you do, you're going to get biological effects in their 3,000 plus studies. So there's a lot of studies backing that number up. A cell phone on a phone call immediately goes over 2,000. One of my meters immediately goes over 2,000, just turning on your phone, and occasionally goes over 200,000. So if the scientists say don't go over 30, but a cell phone's going to 200,000 at times. I mean, it's so, wrap your head around that. I mean, it's so ridiculous. I mean,
that's off the chart.
That's why I say this information and it sounds made up. It sounds like, how could it possibly be that ridiculous, like that big of a gap between thousands of studies, what they say, and what, most, not all governments are saying is safe. I will add, though, there are 40 countries that have already passed federal laws banning Wi-Fi from elementary schools, from cell towers, from going near schools and nurseries, and a bunch of other things because of. Brilliant. So the information is getting out.
That's really encouraging.
I mean, Spain, Belgium, Italy, France, Israel. There's a long list of countries. So that's the good news. So it is going to slowly get to everywhere because the information is so overwhelming. It's just coming out more and more. And in the United States, I have a bunch of examples of organizations, government agencies actually starting to suggest similar things. So we haven't made laws in a federal level yet, but I think we're heading there.
Okay, well, that is quite encouraging because, the idea of schools being saturated with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth is really quite tragic. I suppose just to complete, just a little bit of a rewind, to complete the list of harmful things in the home, I omitted to mention the microwave oven, of course. I mean, that's obviously quite a large one, I would guess. I mean, how contained are the harmful microwaves in a microwave oven? I have heard it said that you should be more than 20 feet away from one, but do you have any information on that?
If your listeners want to get excuse me, an RF meter or a microwave measuring meter, you can generally go across the room and point at the microwave oven and turn the microwave oven on, and your meter will skyrocket. So you'll see that the levels are, leaking out like crazy. Basically, radiation is photons, which is the smallest unit of light and energy, traveling light speed and carrying energy, okay? Yeah. Photons fit through the giant holes that you see in the front of a microwave oven now. So a microwave oven used to be called a radar range back in the day. I have a fun story that I've heard. I haven't verified it true, but I heard that it was Navy guys standing next to radar, like you had mentioned on ships, noticing that the candy bars in their pockets were melting out in the freezing cold weather, standing next to the radar. So somebody had an idea, gosh, we could use this radar stuff, which is microwave, same thing, to heat things. And then that's how the radar range came about. And then it didn't sell very well because radaring your food sounds kind of gross, right? So they said, well, let's change it to microwave oven because that's just a little wave. That sounds all pretty and fun. So they did that, and they started selling. And then one marketing company learned that the FDA and other organizations had the levels so high as to what they considered safe that they could literally put holes in the front of a microwave oven. A lot would leak out, but it's still less than the law said was, not okay. So everybody wants to see their food, so they started selling, and then every company switched over to having those holes, which is let leaking out massive amount of microwave radiation out the front.
Shit.
It's crazy.
Okay, so the takeaway message there is don't, for God's sake, use a microwave oven.
No, we don't. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so maybe we can look at some of your products then. How do we go about remediating this? Because I have heard that you can supplement with magnesium, for example, which does help mimic calcium channel blockers. So that can go some way to countering that effect of all the calcium rushing into the cells. What sort of solutions are you presenting, Corey?
well, we have products that address the chaos, and we believe stopping the non-ionic, non-thermal effects. And so far, our studies have showed that we're either stopping or drastically reducing even the thermal effects of a phone too. But when you address the subatomic chaos, we have products that create a field. It's almost like it's not a magnetic field, but it's like one. So if you have EMFs creating forces that are jumping all different directions and it's shaking things, so forth. If you put a magnet down, everything wants to go north and south and line up, right? So it takes the forces that are chaotically going all over and it starts to smooth them out, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We create a very light field that's about 1,000,000 times lighter than magnetism, but it's still just strong enough to smooth it out that it seems like it's maybe stopping our reaction. How do we theorize that we're stopping this reaction? You can go to our website, but we've done the thermal imaging tests. We've done, my favorite, the blood tests. Every person we've put on a cell phone call for 2 minutes, or in front of a smart meter, your electric meter, for 2 minutes, or standing under power lines for 2 minutes. Every time their blood gets sticky and other changes have happened to it. We have experts that do these studies for people.
Yep.
And every time so far we've used our products properly, that has stopped that process cold, and it hasn't happened. So that and 5 other ways we've tested our products, we're pretty sure we're stopping that VGCC from opening, because it seems the common sense testing that we're doing seems like the effects are gone. And you add that with an absolute ton of testimonials, that's pretty
sure.
We're excited.
So is that a product that you wear on your person then? You talked about people literally going out there and standing under the power lines in order to test it. So is that a wearable product?
Yeah, so we have a bunch of products. So we have one product that generically does a field to a whole house or business. It's called a commander box. You put it on your by your smart meter or electric meter, and it travels through the electric wires, literally creating a field through your whole house.
Okay.
Then we have separate products for microwave producing things like your Wi-Fi router, Wi-Fi printer, Xbox, PlayStation. These are huge Wi-Fi producing devices. All those things, called an appliance harmonizer. It's a little clip that goes on the electric cord, and that takes care of those individually. For phones and laptops, we have like chips. So on the back of my phone, when I take my case off, you have this little chip that goes right on the back there next to the battery. And I just put my case over top of the chip, and that creates a field on the phone that seems to be strong enough to stop all reactions and all of our testing. And then you mentioned a patch. So it's a little credit card sized device that you could put in your pocket, put in your wallet, and it gives you, I would say, partially to mostly remediating all the EMFs around you. So it's when I started wearing that personally, I had major changes to my health over time started happening, where, I'm now 48 and I've never been this strong in the weight room in my whole life. When I run, my heart rate's much lower. Our products cure nothing. Like, we don't have a cure for anything. Okay. No medical things going away, but what our products do is they take a huge physical stress, just gone, in my opinion, just takes it away. And when that happens, your body can heal itself in ways. And the most common, by the way, is we get people sleeping better, resting better, having more energy and you know, a lot of other fun stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard it said that that the heart pacemaking cells, as well as brain cells, have a particularly high level of these voltage gated calcium channels, and therefore, you know, these EMFs can be, or can be implicit in all sorts of heart atrial fibrillation and irregular heartbeat problems, as well as, you know, with, as you mentioned, with sleep patterns and possibly even depression. But just to come back
When I
to,
was sick,
go on.
I was going to say, when I was sick years ago, I had heart palpitations. My heart would skip a beat. I don't know what you call it. Like it would pound and it would feel it and scare me. I did all kinds of, for a while, heart testing, this is and that's. And I seemed to always get it when I was on my computer for a long time. And that hasn't happened in years to me. Like, I mean, I have so many things gone. You know, can I 100% say it's EMF remediation, whatever? You know, not officially, but it's pretty fun that I haven't had so many symptoms like that. That one, my wife used to do the same. She would study, and she's on her laptop studying, and she would have to take a break every once in a while because she would have like pain in her chest. She'd kind of have to rub it out. She had to walk around for a little bit and then get back studying again. And so she too hasn't had any of that for some years now.
Fantastic. Going back to your product that clips onto the whole house system, you mentioned that it applies a field. Is that the same magnetic field then that kind of disrupts or organizes, if you like, all that randomness of the field? Can you explain a little bit about how that product works? Is it the same?
Yeah, so it organizes it. You can say organizes it or harmonizes it. Those are words that we use. It's proprietary, what we're using, exactly how we're doing it. As a matter of fact, I'm, knock on wood, I'm working on a meter that might be able to measure the chaos that causes our VGCC reaction. And my goal is, and luckily I got a cell phone number, my goal is to get to a certain point where I can call Dr. Martin Paul and see if he can back it up with some testing and see if, you know, we pieced it all together perhaps. But for now, we have a material that it's not a magnetic field. I use that as an analogy so that people can wrap their head around how it works a little bit. But I will say that a magnet partially does remediate EMFs. So if you had nothing, you know, you can't access our products, you were dirt poor, broke, or whatever. I used to do this when I was sick. I literally put a magnet in my back pocket, just a refrigerator magnet. And I noticed that my symptoms were a little less when I wore that. The problem with magnetism, if you had enough magnetism to properly remediate electromagnetic frequencies, the magnetism potentially could be too great, and that starts to affect our human body in a negative way. Like, you don't want to ever put a strong magnet near your heart and walk around like that. That starts to interfere with, you know, our electrical system. So, but a small magnet in your pocket, it's going to partially remediate EMFs, in my opinion.
Okay. What about?
We just found different properties that do it better. Much stronger with a lot lighter forces.
Sure. What about things like grounding, you know, literally sort of bare feet on the earth, or maintaining the same electrical potential as the earth, and you know, benefiting from any free electrons coming from the earth? Do you think there's any merit in that in terms of remediating against EMF effects?
Yes and no. So I don't think, because I haven't found any other solution besides the one we're using that seems to cut off that first domino that fell down so that the rest of them wouldn't happen, which I think we've discovered, and I'm in the process of proving with meters and the rest of it. But grounding, I encourage people to Google like the possible negative effects of grounding, because there's some very well-known scientists and medical doctors that will say it could be good, it could be bad. So if you're grounding when you're walking out on a field, walking around on a beach where everything's grounded, that does help remediate EMFs and their effects. That is going to have some layers of protection because of all the negative ions and so forth that you're going to be exposed to. And the earth is a negative ground anyway. But if you have a negative, like a grounding pad on your bed or a grounding pad at your computer, and you think that that's helping, grounding is basically getting rid of voltage, and voltage is like pressure in a hose. So the amount of water coming out isn't voltage. The pressure inside the hose is voltage. So people theorized that voltage, maybe that was equal to the problem of EMFs. And again, that's not directly true at all either. That's one of the factors that could be representing what the problem is. But anyway, if you're the only negative source, grounding means all the positive charges can go through you to get out. They're trying to ground themselves out through you to get out. Okay. And if you're the grounding, everything in the room is trying to get through you to get out. You've just increased the exposure to EMFs, even though you decreased the voltage.
Okay.
So there's a lot to argue that in those circumstances, it could, depending on your surrounding, it could benefit you or it could make it worse. So I encourage people to Google that for themselves. But there's physicists that explain it better than I did that'll say, like, maybe you need to look at another place.
Sure. Okay. Perhaps we can just have a quick look at 5G, this new technology that's coming up. What are the impacts of that? Is that gonna be considerably worse than the technology that we're all using with our smartphones at the moment? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The problem with 5G is the frequency just got higher. So your Wi-Fi goes to 5 billion waves per second. Still not enough to directly harm us. But again, when it oscillates fast, it creates more chaos, which is, again, the problem. So the 5G is between 24 and 90 billion waves a second. So we're increasing it so much, willy-nilly like this. I have experience with this because I had our products on our home. And my wife and I woke up a couple of years ago. We didn't sleep good. We didn't feel good. We felt like we had the flu. We didn't know what was going on. And we had holistic measures. We were trying to figure out what was wrong with us and how we could take nutrition and do this and that to try to feel better. Turns out they put a 5G cell tower 15 yards from my living room window, and we're on the second and third floor. So, I didn't know because it doesn't look like the normal cell tower. They're little barrels, or even sometimes they're even just this thick, and sometimes they're this thick, but it's just little barrels about this, foot or two tall on top of poles. The problem with it is twofold. One is very high frequencies. Two is every wave isn't created alike. So the type of waves, we think of a wave as, like kind of a uniform wave. That's not how waves are. So different technologies use different waves. There's square, and there's different ones that have jagged edges, and all kinds of different ways we can make waves. That's another little issue. But I think the biggest factor of 5G cell towers is that because of the high frequency, many of those photons are going to bash into particles going through the air. When they do that, the original frequency doesn't travel as far.
Okay.
So they have to put these every 800 feet because they only go about 1,000. They have to overlap them so everybody gets good service. So on my block now, because I'm one of the first neighborhoods that got this great technology, which I love, by the way. I'm not against the 5G. I use it. I have a cell phone. I have a laptop. I have all of it. I work 5 feet from a very strong router, but I have faith that we remediated it, and I've never been healthier. But anyway, these have to be, I have 4 within a block and a half of me now.
Gosh.
So virtually every house, maybe there's a lot of houses that are kind of further from actual cell towers because they generally can go up to 50 miles. A big cell tower can transmit up to 50 miles for a phone call. But these have to be, everybody's going to have one right in front of their house or pretty darn close if they have to have 3 or 4 in everybody's block, which that's what they say they're going to do. So that's what makes it such a big deal because it's going to be a sea of 24 to 90 billion waves a second in everybody's house and between the whole neighborhood is going to be covering this stuff.
Yeah, great. So I mean, again, generally the main view out there in the mainstream is that 5G, brilliant, another sort of notch up the rung of convenience, of better technology, but clearly at a price. So that's really important to know, and maybe people should join in and campaign against 5G. Can I add something? Yes, please.
I'm not campaigning against it. I love the technology.
Okay.
I didn't move. I live close to the beach, and I'm in a month-to-month rent. I just put another commander box on our home, and poof, we slept better, and we stayed here another 2 years plus. So my goal is it's different than the smoking industry because smoking has negative effects. You can't get around those. I really believe we can remediate and fix the effects of these EMFs. I really, really do.
Okay.
And my goal is ultimately to take when our technology and our and our proofs are finished, in my opinion, when it's just solid and buttoned up beyond a shadow of a doubt with third-party everything, and hopefully our meters is done, I want to really go to one of these companies one day and say, hey, now that, you know, this is new information. The discovery was 5 years ago. It's just becoming, you know, knowledge. Why don't we get with a company and have a competitive advantage where some cell phone company decides, I'm going to remediate every cell phone off the line. It's going to show up in people's hands already fixed. Or a company that says, I'm going to remediate every 5G cell tower, which we can do, because I believe we've done it. And then we can live in this world with all this cool technology. We can be the Jetsons, but we don't have to have the side effects. And I really believe that's possible. And I do think that a company one day will see that enough people are protesting and being, you know, trying to ban cell towers from going up, which is happening a lot in California and Washington, when it can show up and say, don't worry, you know, we don't think it's that big a harm or within legal limits, but just because you're worried about it, we're gonna remediate it. Here's the proof.
Yeah.
And then they just remediate every cell tower, and then people invite them to their towns. They invite the cell phones. They give in, you know, then it's not a problem. So I'm actually very cautious. I'm not against the technology. I want the technology. I think it's done wonderful things for our world. But I do think one day we're going to have to make this knowledge well enough known that everybody should just fix it.
Sure. I mean, that's a great point. And so it's not a question of necessarily, I mean, being anti-technology. I'm not anti-technology either. But to me, it seems that it can't be beyond the wit of man to come up with a form of communication. I mean, the smartphones are fantastic. Everybody loves them, of course. There must be a way of doing that with some technology, maybe not microwave in the future, maybe something else. And to me, I see the value of getting this message out about the dangers of EMF is that, you know, if enough people perhaps shared this and knew this information, maybe that would be pressure to sort of evolve the technology on perhaps to some other, you know, less harmful form. Maybe that's another possibility as well. But it's great that we can do some remediation, you know, in the meantime, which is really exciting with what you're doing, Corey. Corey, I have to say, maybe you can tell us whereabouts you are and how listeners can contact you. And then I want to ask you, do you ship to the UK as well? Because I know you're over there in California.
So, yeah, we're working on the possibility of doing that. So I don't know if we start getting a lot of orders, because I get orders periodically from all different countries. But, you know, for one here and there, it's tough. But we might be opening up that pretty soon. But our website is, you know, emfsol.com, EMF Soul, and all the products are on there. There's a page that tells you how to assess the biggest problems in your home and what products would coincide with a solution for you. So obviously that if somebody's in the United States, that's a lot easier. Then we have the toll-free number on there to call for advice. So meanwhile, if I couldn't get my hands on products, because I don't really know anybody that's doing what we're doing. There's a couple companies that are doing similar things that I don't think are near strong enough, but they're doing a pretty good job. I would at least, bare minimum, get the Bluetooth cameras out of the room of your kids. Get the Wi-Fi as far away from your beds and where people as possible, and shut it off when you're going to bed. At least that means you have a better chance of sleeping at night. Don't let your Xbox and PlayStation be on standby or rest mode. Turn them off, and do your best to avoid as much of this as you can. Getting the fans ideally far away, if not out of the bedroom. These are all like common sense things. And of course, I totally trust our products. I mean, I literally don't have any reason, because when you've seen test after test after test what we've done, and have it seemingly work in the blood test every time we've tried it, and other ones, and I feel amazing, could have never been healthier, and my wife too. Like, I just have so many cool testimonials that you know, I think we can live with this radiation. And our solutions, by the way, are not man-made. We actually, there's two scientific properties we test in basically crystals and rocks and things, and we use some metals that along with it. But we use there's natural ways of remediating these problems, and I think we found it, and we've grown them fast, and I'm excited to share this with the world, because I think it really needs it.
Absolutely. Well, Corey, thank you so much for helping to explain this danger, if you like, to the listeners. Something that we never hear about in the mainstream news. It's always perfectly safe. It's great to hear that you're still pro technology. It's exciting to hear that there are ways around this potentially. I've heard, as I mentioned, supplementing with magnesium is one, and there's also an exercise routine originated by Dr. Zach Bush called the nitric oxide dump, which actually helps release some of that harmful nitric oxide from the cells, which is also worth doing. And I'll put information about that in the show notes as well. But thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Corey. And I'd strongly recommend anybody, particularly listeners and viewers in the United States, maybe check out his website and indeed his services if you're anywhere near California. So also, I recommend you guys check out the website lawfulrebel.com for all sorts of other information that you won't hear out there in the mainstream media, to try and make sure that we can all thrive and that our well-being is not compromised by factors that we don't know about. So thank you very much for listening, and I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.
Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see. Be the change you want to see.